horror. Hopefully I am speaking in some way. I'm too off for this. My name is Kat Day, and I work for the horror podcast Pseudopod. I don't know if anyone knows it?
Yeah.
Okay, right, well that makes it easier. Right, yeah, so that's partly why. I also used to be a teacher, so I'm partly here to keep everyone in line. But yeah, no, so we spend a lot of time reading horror and kind of arguing amongst ourselves as to what we're going to publish at Pseudopod. So we're here today to talk about 21st century horror and maybe a little bit about how things have changed over time. So we have got a pretty fantastic panel here. I've got a few little summaries. So we've got Philip. Now you know what, Philip? I realise I don't know how to pronounce your surname properly.
Fracassi.
Fracassi. There we go. Philip Fracassi. Philip is the Stoker-nominated author of the novels A Child Alone with Strangers, Gothic and Boys in the Valley, as well as the award-winning story collections Behold the Void and Beneath a Pale Sky. And the New York Times calls his work terrifically scary. Yeah, fantastic. And then we've got Ramsey. I'm not sure, does Ramsey need introducing?
I hope so, because I've forgotten the name, so I'm talking about that.
Described in the Oxford Companion to English Literature as Britain's most respected living horror writer. And the Washington Post sums up his work as one of the monumental accomplishments of modern popular fiction. In 2015, he was made an honorary fellow of Liverpool John Moores University for outstanding services to literature. And I'm going to just borrow the words of Pseudopod's kind of normal host, Alistair Stewart, because Alistair has hosted several of Ramsey's stories. And he said that Ramsey Campbell is consistently defined by three things: a brutal emotional honesty, a bone-dry sense of humour, and an incredible eye for the unsettling. So we'll come back to that bit later.
I'll send him the fiver, don't worry.
Yeah. You might see him later, because he said he was going to come down later. So, and then after Ramsey, we've got Raven Dane. Raven is an Irish citizen with a Welsh father, but based in England. Openly pagan and a total SF and horror nerd from an early age. Her horror writing tends to stay in her comfort zone, which is one of the Victorian and medieval eras, which is another thing we're going to come back to. But she does also have some 21st century short stories published, she says. And finally, we've got Phil at the end, and we need to remember that we've got Phil and Philip. Phil is a writer of dark psychological fiction, and he was shortlisted for the British Fantasy Award Best Newcomer for his novella Becoming David, and edited the 2020 British Fantasy Award nominated The Woods Anthology. And his recent collection is called No Happily Ever After. Fantastic. All right.
It's a very joyous, happy tale.
Well, horror, I mean, this is the thing with horror, isn't it? So, I'm going to come back to that point that Raven made to me, because I asked people for their introductions, and when Raven sent me hers, it made me think, this is trouble now, I'm getting at that age. I know, yes. So when I saw this title of this panel, I interpreted it about being about stories published in the 21st century. But Raven said to me, maybe it could, because of what Raven said, it made me think, maybe it could also be interpreted as stories set in the 21st century versus stories set in the past. So that was the question I wanted to ask you. Do you think that stories set before the 21st century but published now count as 21st century horror? Because I know you've written a lot of, you write a lot of that sort of thing.
I have a slightly different feel to the whole thing. 21st, we're talking about new scary things in the 21st century, and we all of us are descendants of cave people who were fearful enough not to poke cave bear or eat the poison berries, and lived long enough to procreate. And this has gone on down to the centuries. And the things that people have always been scared of, famine, war, pestilence, death, that's carried all the way and then down to even now, because we only have to look at the news to know that famine, war and pestilence are still there, were truly there. With 21st century horror, we have new things to explore. I'm terrified of some of the AI things. where people can be reproduced, and people couldn't believe that these are people doing things. There was one I saw the other day of Joe Biden tripping over things on a staircase over and over and over again as he went up. He never did that. But it's trying to make him out as being a total incompetent old fool, And there's a lot of horror that can use for these modern things. So I think 21st horror has opened up a whole new sort of area to explore in horror stories.
I very much agree. Yes. I think the internet is a larger thing, really. But yeah, the internet is well, it's all sorts of things. One thing obviously is it's the Library of Babel. It's Borges' notion of the library with everything that's ever been written, all human knowledge in a single place. It's becoming that. Of course, the problem is it also has the sum of all human ignorance in there, and they're not easily distinguished. But equally, it is the place surely where, and I'm not going to exempt myself from this. It's a place where many of us go so that the monsters within us could finally be released, and I in a way that does not happen in ordinary, human interaction. There's now this whole area, it seems to me, the ether, whatever you want to call it, where we're sort of owning up to the darkest aspects of ourselves, and theoretically without any comeback either. Although in a way we're also getting something very old-fashioned indeed. The witch hunter's back with us. Well, obviously that's never really been away. Whether it be with McCarthy in the 50s or various Mao in a different way. But that whole sense of the mob that will descend upon it's the lottery as well. It's Shirley Jackson. It's the mob that singles out the other, the person who dares to disagree with the received notions. And I have to say, I'm speaking from personal experience, because last week I trended on Twitter. Well, whether we get into that is another matter, but
me next.
Yes, well, yeah, you bet. But those are just a few of the. Well, let me hand over.
Yeah, Philip, do you, some of your stories in Beneath Our Sky kind of cross over that century line, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of my stories are contemporary 21st century horror. I recently wrote a mashup that was of near future and near past, a noir detective in the near future, which I thought was interesting to mashup to write about. My thing with 21st century horror, I think, is what I have discovered is, like, my most recent book, for example, is set in 1905, and what I sort of love about period versus contemporary is that you are kind of taking the reader into a mythical story world where it feels very set off from what we're experiencing day to day, and I think that creates a more realistic, in a way, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but almost a more realistic story world for the reader to experience what you're telling them, because they're not distracted by the Twitter thing, they're not, or X or whatever, they're not distracted by all the contemporary stuff that a reader lives with when they put every day when they put the book down. So I think it's more escapism when you do something that's set not necessarily in contemporary, but that's something that I have found that I sort of enjoy about period versus contemporary. The things I don't enjoy about period is it's more research, but but Google is a writer's best friend when writing a period piece. So, but I've enjoyed taking the reader away to somewhere else and then telling them the story, not at their home, not in what the things they're dealing with today. I think it's a nicer sense of escape.
Phil, do you want to?
Yes, so some of the stuff I quite like with the 21st century stuff is thinking around almost the that Black Mirror-esque thing that you have, where it's that near future, and there's enough there that you can bring terror in with something that you can't quite understand. We're not quite there with the technology yet, but we know we're not too far away. But the driver through any of this is always how people react within the situation. So any of that sort of like technology stuff, there's lots of stuff going on. We talked about AI. if you think around when the Large Hadron Collider was being set up how many years ago, and there was all the fear, are they going to throw some atoms at each other and the world's all just going to explode? And it's that fear of the unknown. So, it's back to what Raven was saying earlier, things we're scared of and stuff, with the fear of the dark and what's hiding in the dark, and what's hiding within the science and the technology, and because we don't quite know it yet, so we can poke at it, it could be great and brilliant, but it could just be the most detrimental thing ever to happen to us, and just building on those inner fears and the way that people react. And that's the thing, horror across all the years, all the centuries, etc. For me, it's all about reaction and people and character and how we've been through a pandemic, and it's really interesting from a writing point of view to see how people react very differently to that pandemic, the selfishness, the people who've been very altruistic within it, and all different shades of humanity throughout. So so there's some thoughts there.
Sorry. No, you went.
Well, immediately asked really, I mean, to what extent do we feel setting our fiction in the present, that we have to acknowledge the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because you see, I mean, just for me personally, I mean, I wrestled with this for quite a while, and I decided, when I thought about it, I thought, no, it's not necessary. And the reason I thought about that was that, you look at, say, 20s novels by Fitzgerald or Hemingway or Virginia Woolf, let's say, and you don't get Spanish flu. It's not in, it's very seldom acknowledged, even though it's so crucial, just a few years previously. And so I thought, no, okay, we can kind of, if you like, skip that, or it may be implied, but funnily enough, the novel that just came out of mine, once that developed, once I realised what it was about loss and grief, basically, among other things. It just seemed to be that COVID was absolutely the background of what I wanted to write about. So I ended up writing one after all, whether I thought I never would.
All I was going to say regarding Phil's point was I feel another thing that's terrifying a bit for everyone in society is the propulsion with which technology is advancing. We're reaching the singularity so much more. Ray Kurzweil talks about it, a lot, and so I feel like that, it's exponentially getting faster and faster and faster, and I don't think anybody really knows how fast we're going to get to a point. And we're all talking about AI and robots and Terminator type situations, but I do think, all the fiction aside, it is terrifying to realize that we are slowly losing our grasp on humanity day by day, and it's getting faster and faster and faster. And that seems to be something, at least that worries me, and I know is this terrifying thing to write about, is just how quickly we're going to lose our grasp on all the things that we've held dear as a society when it comes to arts and literature and all those kind of things. So that's a terrifying thing to think about.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And Raven, if I come to you, because you write a lot of kind of vampire stories.
Yeah, they're sort of, they're not.
And I'm thinking
they're basically they're a species of. They're not human, and they're just a species higher up the food chain, basically. It comes to the end. I won't give it a go. But they're there for a reason. They don't realise it, but they're there for a reason.
But I think that's how I want to kind of link these two together, because it's about that loss of humanity, not being human. Like, what do you think about the way that kind of classical, in scare quotes, monsters have always been a metaphor for humans behaving inhumanly, and how we can carry that forward.
Yeah, the monsters are a good sort of scapegoat for that, aren't they?
Yes.
We're all lovely people, and we just burnt a witch down the village, but we're not monsters. That woman who dishes out herbs and is a midwife and helps people, and she's the monster. I think it's the sort of pushing off away from us to align other people and other things. I think that sort of underlines an awful lot of human society over the years, and it's still going on, as you mentioned.
Oh yeah, well, it's the scapegoat principle.
Scapegoat principle, yeah. And also the witch hunt thing, which I hate the use of that, because being witch as well. Don't come over here. But a certain orange person keeps using that term recently, and I use the term rightly. I do not want our society to lurch into that sort of mentality again, the scapegoat, refugees, or any sort of part of humanity. And unfortunately, as we said, the media and social networking and everything is aiding this thing. You know? I mean, I was shocked the other day, a lass I known for a long, long time, Irish lass. She put up this awful fascist thing about from some Irish politician who's going on, how terrible immigrants are and everything like that. And I was so shocked. I thought, before I blocked her, I put back. You do realise our people have suffered famine and war and all sorts of terrible things over the years, cholera and all that stuff. There was great diaspora, about 1 million Irish people moved up from Ireland during the famine, and they were settled all around the world. And have they been given the treatment you're giving these people? Why are they different? You know? So, again, it's the social media's propelling all this witch hunt, really, and this scapegoating, and that's scary in itself. That's a horror story.
Yeah. I was just gonna, it's Faceless Voices. I saw a skit about, online about, and the skit was the two people in an elevator as if they were in separate cars. And so the guy was like screaming into the face of the guy next to him, like calling him all these horrible names, and they were like right next to each other. But it gives you a sense of like, right, when social media, it's like people say whatever they want because they're faceless and you can't do anything about it. There's no retribution, so they feel empowered to say and do things that they normally would never say and do in real life. But the one thing I wanted to comment on, because I thought was interesting, that popped in my head when you mentioned monsters being representative of the near future or the terrors of the future. I actually think in some way, not that that's sort of separately, when I think of monsters, I almost think of them as clinging to the past. Like they're kind of like these comfortable classic tropes that we love and that have been written about for centuries, and whether it's vampires or something, or Frankenstein or something created, mummies or something totally created new. It does feel like horror in a lot of ways is comfortable because we cling to the past of like, look, let's just tell a scary story, and let's not make it necessarily about politics and about artificial intelligence or about COVID. Like maybe we're just going to tell a scary story about a monster that comes in your house at night and steals your breath or whatever it is. But there's something kind of comforting, I think, for people when reading horror it's like comfort food, right? It's an escapism from all of the horrors that we're dealing with, because things are so awful now in real life that it's almost like, as a fiction writer, I don't feel it's my responsibility to make that more horrible when you're reading my book. I want you to have to I want to give you something else to think about for a couple hours.
There's something that you were saying there around the monsters and everything. I know there's thing that's occurring to me as we progress in society is that back in the day, cave people, you'd have a bit of flint maybe and a stick and stuff to take the monsters down with, and nowadays we've got all these missiles and guns and things, and I'm just thinking of like something like Tim LeBon's The Silence, and it's that thing of suddenly all the weaponry that we had was absolutely useless because of the way these monsters and these creatures came. And there's something I think around writing the monsters within, around how all of our, we're all big and bold and brave because we have all this technology and all these things that will protect us. And when those mechanisms, those comfort blankets that we have that won't protect us and save us, how are we able to respond to that? And there's almost that thing of I think writing these sort of things are kind of going, right, how do I get past all these massive security systems that we've got in place, just to bring back the fear and that vulnerability of us as humans within these situations.
I mean, recently been reading Dave Jeffries' anthology stories. It was pre-COVID that started off, and it's basically a strain of meningitis that deafens people. The slide into sort of a completely different society, a very harsh and cruel society. Being a human being and a decent human being is becoming harder and harder and harder. That's, when it was prescient. It was before COVID, and it's a stark reminder that some of the worst monsters are us, ordinary, everyday people, and people that were before the awful pandemic were everyday people, kind old ladies, the whole thing, and the horror of this pandemic has turned people into monsters, and I think for 21st century horror, I think that is an absolute perfect example of it. It really is. You know, how far are we from being monsters? We all think ourselves good people, but when it comes to our lives on the line and our survival, how far do we go before we go across the line? We're not very far at all.
I just made some notes myself and I wrote down Cormac McCarthy's The Road.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those most horrific
Oh,
things, and
yeah.
as you say, it's humanity breaking down.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
Post-apocalyptic novels are never happy. They're never, they never band together and fight through, and it's always like a disaster. I just wanted to mention another title I was thinking about when Raven was talking, and it's just a throw out, is I feel like one of the best pandemic novels I've ever read was actually written before the pandemic, which was Paul Tremblay's Survivor Song, because he did it so well, and he didn't even know there would be a pandemic, and it came out.
Unless he started it.
Unless he started, right.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
When I was with Chuck Wendick, he mentioned that he started it for research purposes. It feels really bad about the whole thing, but you know, he needed to get the book written, so.
It's an interesting point, actually. I was in one of the panels about villainy earlier, and they were making the point that the villain and the hero are just a question of points of view.
Oh yeah.
Right? From the villain's point of view, they're the hero.
Yeah.
And often from the people being exposed to their actions, from their point of view, it can be quite different, depending on whether they're kind of in their favour or not. So it's the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
When something pivots to horror is very much about that point of view. Yeah, actually, let's talk about points of view, actually, because I feel like that's something that's, I'm quite happy to be argued with, though. Something that's changed over time is that when you go back to read older stories, they're mostly written in third person. And I feel like third person past tense. And I feel like today there is much more first person present tense. I'm going to muddle up my language now. Or and actually more second person as well.
Yeah.
And I wonder what people thought about that and why you make those choices in your own writing. Why would you, how do you feel that affects the scariness, the creepiness of the story?
I think it's because of immediacy, isn't it, if it's going to be first person? I mean, to be honest, it's instinctive with me. I mean, I've done a few novels in first person in present tense. I've only risked doing second person, I think, in the odd very short story. And the only reason I did that was actually as a kind of tribute to the old DC comics, where the actual continuity was often addressed to the character by the tale teller, if you like. But no, I mean, to be honest, I suppose it all comes, for me, just in terms of where I get the idea, would be Joyce Carey. Mr. Johnson specifically, which is a novel written entirely in the present tense. The first person brings you that much closer. It also, of course, in productive ways, limits your viewpoint. You can't anticipate for a start, unless you're doing some very interesting things with the time, and you can, but that's another thing. And probably I think we're coming on to kind of new techniques, aren't we? Not that I know any, but just to remind you, we're going to raise the issue. But yes, I think that's fundamentally it. You're experiencing things as directly as possible. Given that it seems to be happening in the moment, if you like, and not to you, the reader, certainly to your surrogate in the text. Yeah.
Yeah, my current book is written. Boys in the Valley is written. There's 12 from 5 perspectives, and the main protagonist's perspective is first person, and the other perspectives are third person. And I did that very specifically because I wanted the reader to associate the most with this one character as we went through the story for multiple reasons. But it does bring in present tense brings immediacy, but first person brings that intimacy, where you're suddenly now you feel like they're the ones who you're representing you, the reader, in the story. And then third person takes you a little bit back away from there and sort of sends things away and shows you a little bit more of the world. But it's a tool that I use often in the same book, where I had another book where I started the book past tense, switched to present tense, you know, a quarter of the way through, because I wanted to speed things up for the reader, wanted everything to start being more immediate for the reader. So it's a technique that you can kind of play with.
Sorry, did it stay in two different tenses, or did you change the whole?
No, so it's about a child is kidnapped. So up until the child is kidnapped, it's all past tense, and then as soon as he's kidnapped, everything up from that part of the book forward is present tense. And I don't think readers really notice it, but it's fairly subtle. But I think it's me saying to the reader, okay, we're going to start going a little faster now. Things are going to get a little more immediate.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and using both in the same story. Yeah.
I mean, one thing it's not only peripherally relevant, I suppose, really, in terms of what the issue of the panel is supposed to be. But I mean, one thing I do find productive is multiple viewpoints, particularly if they can be used to reveal things about one another.
Yes.
I mean, well, a very, very brief novel I called Thieving Fear from the 2000 and something, 2005, 6. I remember the late, great Joel Lane, who I hope some of you still remember, you know, wonderful guy, writer, person, and critic. I remember he sent me, the thing about Joel, he would send you emails, or before those, you know, tiny handwritten, you know, screeds, which were exegeses of your story he had most recently read. And he sent me one about Thieving Fear. And he said when he got to the twist, he had to put the thing down and walk away. And I thought, what twist?
Oh my goodness.
Well, the thing was, I'd assumed that this was, without going into any detail, that, you know, all the characters obviously see things from their own viewpoint, but in this case, this particular character has an issue with body image. And I thought it was probably going to be evident to the reader that, you know, what she perceives about herself and what is actual are two entirely different things. And when we get to the scene around the middle of the novel where all four characters get together, we then see her finally through somebody else's eyes. But I assumed you know that already, but no, there you go. But,
you knew it because you wrote it.
well, yeah, I know. Well, there you go. Sorry, that's a long anecdote for a small point.
No, but it's a good point about points of view. I mean, and Phil, you're No Happily Ever After, some of your stories are from the point of view of children.
Yes.
So how do you think that kind of...
It's basically to lull you as a reader into a very false sense of security and innocence. And I mean, childhood is wonderful because, you know, hopefully people have had happy childhoods. Not everyone does, but it's one of those ones that. So the story, which is called The Teddy Bear's Picnic, it's about this young girl and she's going off with her toys into the woodland, and it's all very innocent. But then you just sort of, because of the innocence, and you know, and so sort of like talking it through, and then you can just filter in little bits of unsettling stuff. There's something not quite right in the family, what's in the woods, and all those kind of things. And it comes to the ending, and the ending is purposely ambiguous. It's one of those ones where you can kind of go, either something really positive happens or something really negative happens, and I'll leave that up to you as the readers to understand. But using children within, in the way I've done there, is quite nice because it's that innocence. You can also have the creepy child, which I think is inherent across many years of writing, and that again, there's something just unsettling about children. They're just a little bit maybe more intelligent than perhaps that they should be, and there's something slightly evil and naughty about them. And you know, oh, did they leave the skate on the stairs for mummy to trip up on it, or was it just happened to be there? And it's those sort of things. And also, you know, inherently, we're, you know, instinctively, generally, it's, you know, we should protect children. Children should be something we should cherish. You might argue that as you will or not, but you know, but it's that thing. And then when something goes against the normal, against the grain, that's part of the horror, part of the terror for us.
Yeah, and I think another side to that is the things adults hide from children.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is not a 21st century story, but I'm thinking of The Rocking Horse by D.H. Lawrence, which we...
The Rocking Horse Winner?
The Rocking Horse Winner, thank you.
Yeah.
That's the one. Where that is all about, it is a slightly creepy child, but it's more about what's going on in the house with the parents and what the parents are hiding from the children. And I think probably that is not something that has really changed, probably will never change, because there's always that element of things that go, layers of things that go on in a house that the children don't know about necessarily. So if you speak from the child's point of view, then that's a bit like saying.
Is it from his view? I can't remember. Is it from his viewpoint, or is it more of a third person perspective?
It is third person, but
yeah.
it's kind of close third person from the boys'
Yes.
point of view of what's going on. So you're sort of hearing his version.
That's right, yeah. Well, I mean, one great instance of this, I know we're drifting away, but you know.
Well, no, but it's about, you know, it's about how horror has changed.
Yeah.
And so that,
But not particularly horror, I'm just thinking of The Fallen Idol, the Graham Greene.
Yeah.
You know, wonderful instance of the child's limited viewpoint. But I suppose best of all is the first person child's viewpoint, not so much an unreliable narrator as an unaware narrator. And you can do a great deal with that. I mean, still, to my mind, still these sort of masterpieces, The White People, the Arthur Machen, which is, I think, quite extraordinary. If you don't know it, guys, give it a shot. Give it a shot.
I mean, there's an argument that all narrators are unreliable, isn't there? Because everyone sees everything from their point of view. So that's, and maybe that's part of horror, actually, is that discovery of, oh, maybe what I thought was true isn't true. Like, that's probably, you know, I thought I was safe, but I'm not. I thought this person was, you know, on my side, but they're not. You know, that's, I feel like that's quite a fundamental sort of idea in horror.
So if you get something like Cat Wars' Last House on Needless Street, that's beautifully, you know, unreliable narrator, multiple without spoiling things, but it's that thing of going through it, and she does it sort of masterfully, of, you know, taking you through this journey, and you just kind of go, oh, I've got this, and then, well, no, I haven't, and it's very, very, very well done, and you know, it's exactly that thing. When you sort of think as a reader, oh, I'm there, I understand where things are going now, and that beautiful thing of going, no, I've hoodwinked you, but in a really nice, delightful, clever, I say delightful, but in a very nice way, you know, for you to kind of go, I was thinking about language, like, blooming heck, you know, that was brilliantly done, and so, yeah, the word may have started with F that I was thinking in my head to start with, so, yeah.
We'll know what you want.
Yeah.
But actually, perhaps that comes back to the idea about monsters again, right? If you think that somebody is one thing and then they're not that thing, you know, that's quite a fundamental.
I mean, that's a classic instance, that novel, the monster turning out to be not who you thought it was. Well, without, we mustn't say too much, because maybe folk haven't read it yet. In this case, you should. By all means, Last House on Leaders Street.
I talking about creepy children. As a child, I was brought up with this thing called Cousin Richard. Cousin Richard was terrifying. Everybody was scared of him. No one wanted to invite his parents around because Cousin Richard would come along. He was an absolute horrific child. Really scary. I was raised with this sort of character, you know. And I always wanted to know what happened to Cousin Richard, what sort of person. We used him in a story, which I haven't finished writing at the moment, where this protagonist has got an evil cousin Richard, and who is very evil. It went back to the 21st century horror, because he's a scientist. And he starts messing around with things that you're not meant to mess around with, you know, and he dies, but he doesn't, because he's evil cousin Richard, you know. So evil children, well, I know it's very cliched, but it can be very, very effective with the chills. And that's what we're going to be here for, to frighten you all.
Yes, sir. Which we hope we're doing. If not, we'll step it up.
I don't know if anyone's read Law of the Skies. Have you guys read that one? It's, well, if you haven't read it, read it. It's, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, but it's in the vein of what we're talking about. It's I mean, people call my book sort of violent and Lord of the Flies and Children Are Children violence, which it is.
Oh, so Lord of the Flies.
Oh, Lord of the Flies. I thought it was Lord of the Flies.
No, I did. But so we're comparing,
Presumably
right?
that's a punny
So
title.
it could be, now that you say it out loud, yeah.
Lord of
But
the Skies.
there's a book on Lord of the Skies that is an absolutely horrific book about children, and it starts like very normally, but I think it's set in the near future as well. But I don't want to say any more about it. But if you haven't read it, read, because it's right on topic of what we're talking about. That I can't tell you.
Oh,
I have to look it up.
We'll check it out.
We'll Google it. Yeah, it's I believe he's a French author.
Oh, okay.
I think it's translated into English.
Oh, right.
So we've mentioned a couple of books. My main thing that I end up reading most of the time is short stories. And Philip, in one of there was an introduction in Beneath a Pale Sky, and Josh said some might say the horror story works best the smaller it is. So I wonder what you thought about that.
Josh said that about
It was
me?
in the introduction.
Oh, was it?
I copied it out
Oh,
of the
no,
introduction.
yeah. My stories are so long, so I'm wondering why the context of it was. Yeah, I don't know the context of what his comment was. Josh Mallerman wrote the introduction to my short story collection, Beneath the Pale Sky, and I think, but I'm one of those guys that needs, I need 10,000 words to tell a story. It's very, very, very hard for me to write anything less than 5,000 words. I just can't seem to get the point across that I want to get across in less than 5,000 words. But there is an element of, you know, the 5 words. What's the famous Hemingway story?
Children's books to sell news or something.
Baby shoes
Yes.
never used or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
So there is something very elegant about that. It's also very difficult to get across something very horrific in 1,000 words or less. But I know there's a whole world of flash fiction writers that are doing amazing things in 500 words or less and getting incredible horrific ideas and elements across. I'm not one of them. I'm long-winded. What about you? Are you long-winded? You're pretty long-winded.
Well, I have my moment. I think I need a minimum of about 2,000 actually.
Yeah.
I can do a sort of EC style, horror comic tale in that. But I just think the story has to be as long as that particular story has to be.
Yeah.
And if it's a short story, fine. If it's a novel, equally fine. But the only time I ever did a trilogy, by gum, the only reason to do that, as far as I was concerned, because it could not be other than a trilogy. Although, to be honest, I came at it the other way. It was good old Pete Crowther of PS Publishing, who chided me gently, but insistently over several years. Why don't you do a supernatural trilogy? And eventually, I thought of a reason why it had to be not a huge long volume chopped in 3, but a novel, 3 distinct volumes. It actually sort of spans almost the entire lives of the major central characters, starting in early adolescence, going into mid-40s, and eventually into old age. And of course the world chasing around them, that was the other thing. And that did kind of excite me, so I did it. But mind you, this is utterly off the point, so somebody else talk.
With my fiction, I think the older I get, the shorter the fiction. When I first started, I did this huge trilogy, and I did another huge trilogy, and not epic book, not epic fighting fantasy thing, but and then I started doing short stories, and I got lots and lots of commissions for short stories, so I must be doing something right. And then Joe Meinhardt from Crystal Lake said, could you do something in 500 words or something? I thought, and I did. And it was quite a shock to the system. I was actually able to do a scary story in just 500 words. It might do it one off, but it worked, So I do find that I'm writing more short stories or novellas now. I think it's just maybe creeping grey cells going or something. I don't know. But
you're refining your fiction.
I want to speak up for short story because I'm a flash fiction writer.
Yeah.
I write a lot of flash, and so one of my pieces of flash on Pseudopod is called Never Enough Pockets, and it's a story I really love. And I am the complete opposite of that. I struggle to get out anything that's more than 2,000 words. I just run out, and I've got a friend who writes novels, and we laugh at each other because she's like, I can't do this. I can't 6,000 words. I'm just stretching, and I'm like, I can't get over 600. I can't do it. So yeah, I think it's a very different.
Yeah.
It's a very. You can do some good things with very short fiction that you give that real intense sucker punch.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
There was a book that came out not that long ago that was a whole collection of very short, 2-sentence fiction. I don't recall the name of it, but it was all horror. And it was a major release. I'm sorry, I don't remember the title.
Possibly
Two sentence fiction.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think
wow.
so. I think so. Yeah.
Can I, so just, I don't know Jay Kennedy, I know he does sort of those ones, but there's so I started off writing what's known as Drabble, so 100-word pieces. There's a writer called Lily Childs, and she used to do something called the prediction, and it's just for fun. You'd have 3 words as a prompt, and those 3 words would have to appear within the 100-word Drabble, and there'd be like a weekly prize. You'd get that. This was the favourite story. There was no capital or anything like that, but it was just fun. But I would encourage anyone who's starting off in writing, anyone who's experienced in writing, seriously, just try and write something in 100 words or 500 words, because what it does is it really refines how you use your language, how you will cut out errant words in your short stories, and then in your novellas, and then in your novels, and it really starts to hone your style and how you do things, and you just suddenly realise that but as your writing is, you might kind of go, you've suddenly got lots of that's and whiches and stuff like that within your prose, which you suddenly go, I can't do that. And it's a great way of finessing.
I think as well it encourages you to work on endings.
Yes.
As I think it's quite tempting. So, I mean, because I read a lot of short stories in the what's pejoratively called the slush pile, the submissions pile, I should call it. I read a lot of short stories, and I see so many where the ending doesn't work.
Yeah.
I can tell, I can imagine exactly what's happened. The writer has had this brilliant idea, and it is a brilliant idea, right? And they've started writing it, and they've got kind of 3,000 words in, and they've just sort of stopped. Because they didn't have that sense of, that cycle coming to an end, and they couldn't quite work out. And I think the thing about writing short fiction is it doesn't kind of because you can kind of see the whole story in your head in a way that perhaps is harder to do. So so that's great. I'm conscious of time, because I'm a former teacher, did I mention?
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, and I want to have some time for questions, but I am going to just leave. So if I could just have a quick answer to this question, because I'm stealing Alistair Stewart's quotes from him, and I'm sure he won't mind. But one of my favourite quotes of his is, sometimes the band has been there the whole time, and we just haven't been ready to hear it. Or perhaps more accurately, it hasn't been ready to be heard. So, what do you think hasn't been ready to be heard yet? What do you think is coming up, in other words? If we just maybe some quick answers.
I can't think of anything. It's gone over my head.
There's it's not stuff that I read myself, but there seems to be a larger slew of extreme horror coming through at the moment.
Gosh, yeah.
So obviously there's a market there for it. So that's interesting that that's coming through to the fore more readily, and there's a market coming. So it's not something I'd necessarily gravitate towards, but it seems to be on the rise. Equally, it's nothing new. I just wonder in the new internet-based world and the quicker way that things can get published and all those sort of things, that people are just sort of pushing these things through. Yeah. So I suppose the other thing that I'm seeing coming through is we're getting a lot more diversity in the stories that are coming through, different world experiences and all of those pieces. Obviously, yes, it existed before, but it just seems to be that the market's maybe slightly wider now, possibly more opportunity. And you're sort of starting to see a lot more. I speak with, I'm speaking with some of the experience of Ramsey next to me, because I thought this was happening 50 years ago. So what are you talking about? But there seems to be a lot more. I'm thinking of people like Priya Sharma and Laura Moreau, and trying to describe there's a very exquisite style of their writing. I think there's a bit more freedom for them with in the way that they can express some beautiful, nuanced horror. But I'm not selling it very well, so apologies. I write far better on the page when I don't have to.
I think La Rock is a good example of the diverse voice that's coming through. I'll tell you one quick anecdote regarding that point. And it was a very powerful anecdote that I heard from a friend of mine who I won't name because I know. But who's a writer, very established writer, and he said when I first was trying to sell this novel, and this is probably, he's referring to probably, I think, pre-pandemic, 2018 maybe, and he said they asked me if I would remove my queer characters, and then the second time around with a different novel, they asked me if I could add more queer characters. And he's a queer writer, and he didn't care one way or the other because his attitude was like, it's about this, it's a horror story. I don't really, it doesn't, this is my who I am, so therefore I identify with these kind of characters. But it was interesting from the publishing perspective that was what he was hearing, based on even three, which is a wonderful thing to be hearing, I guess.
I mean, yeah, Ramsey, you've got 60 years.
Well, to be honest, I think you guys have pretty well covered it all, as I can think of. But I mean, what I hope is sort of coming back. Well, I've never really gone away, but sort of sense of awe will do it for me. And yeah, there are writers who are doing that right now. So here's to them, wherever they may be. Victor Laval.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of cosmic horror reflected type things coming through, so I think that's an ever popular topic for discussion. All right, so does anyone have any questions? Yes.
There's none others. I'm just wondering, you were all touching on very early on about, excuse the language, the shit state of the world, and the fact that the world is incredibly scary as it is right now. And I'm just wondering, as horror writers and people who are trying to scare people in a world that is already scary, do you have any sort of personal approaches or tips for other horror writers in the room who might be going, I can't write horror right now because it's just reality?
Well, to be honest, I've got to say this. I have a terrible confession. I don't really set out to be scary. I think the most I set out to be is to disturb the reader. Maybe make us. I mean, me in the writing, you in the reading, and make us look again at things we've taken for granted. But I mean, I think a lot of the stuff I've written does reflect the world. Over half a century. So it tends to take it on and talk about that. However, having said that, I think the uncanny, or indeed, the far reaches of human psychology, they're not quite the same thing. Although it's something Raven's been talking about earlier, that delves pretty deep. They're not quite the same as it's different from realistic fiction about what we're experiencing now. I mean, I do think. I admittedly, one of the things I often say these days, if people say, well, why do you write horror? I tend to say, well, look around you, why wouldn't you write horror?
we like to be scared. Why do we like to be scared? We always, when I was a little kid, way back in the years ago, I used to sneak downstairs, and there was a little gap in the thing, and I could see my mum used to watch horror and all sorts. And I used to watch there, and I know it was things like Psycho, the original series of Quatermass, the original ones, Black and White. And I used to be absolutely terrified, and I absolutely loved it.
Yes.
And why? Why do I want to be scared? And this, I think, it is something in a lot of us humans that we actually enjoy the frisson of being scared.
Yeah.
And if a book is meant to be scary and it isn't, it's a disappointment.
Well, yeah.
This man made me sleep with the light on. In the dark. As in Neville did with Last Days. And I loved every minute of it. And this is something, what is it that us humans that like to be scared so much?
I think we've got to say not so much as humans. I think this is what distinguishes the aficionado from other folk, because obviously the folk say we don't want to be scared. We certainly don't want to read books or see movies, the music, whatever it might be, that frightens us. Clearly we do. In a sense, and possibly it's from childhood. Well, you've just said that.
Yeah,
exactly.
Very early childhood.
And there's this, well, me too, probably true of many, that, at that time the experience was extremely intense, almost insupportable, But then I think what distinguishes the aficionado from other folk is that having survived that, you want to go back and do it again, or repeat that experience or something similar.
Yeah.
And that's
terrifying. Roller coasters.
Right.
I mean, they get more and more and more terrifying. People just queue up for hours for them.
There's a theory though that nightmares exist.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is a way for your brain to process difficult things that have happened to you in a kind of a sort of safe way to get through. And sort of night terrors are the extreme end of that when it becomes untenable. But And I suppose horror stories are just that on a kind of conscious level, right? It's a way for you to deal with difficult things that are happening without actually having to be right in the centre of it, physically trying to actually put out the fire in that moment. So, yeah, I think it's what you say, you know, humans have always done this. We've always used horror as a way to cope.
Yeah, and I'll just add, to get back to your question about using technology or your current status of the society and all that sort of thing, is I think as long as, my advice would be, as long as what you're doing is serving the story, then it's okay. You know, the story has to be paramount to everything. The characters have to serve the story, the setting, the technology, the period that you choose. As long as it serves the story, I think you can do whatever you like. But so just think of it that way, and that's how you'll know what you need and what you don't need. Because if you add things about pop culture that don't serve the story, then it's superfluous to what you're trying to do, and just distracting the reader instead of focusing them.
They're waving at me, so I think we need to wind up. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. If you can